week's top local newsmakers, the week's biggest news stories. It's all the local news that matters, sliced and diced in 30 minutes or less. Next on Week in Review.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes. Glad to have you on this journey through the news of our week, keeping tabs of what's happening on both sides of state line. The head of the editorial page of your Kansas City Star, Colleen Nelson. From the world of television news, KMBC 9 chief political reporter Michael Mahoney. From the Call newspaper, senior writer Eric Wesson, and Star columnist and editorial writer Dave Helling. The Kansas City T-Bones have officially been evicted from their stadium in Kansas City, Kansas. The locks were changed, the gates padlocked, blocking team personnel from entering what has been their home for the past 16 years. The move came after the minor league baseball franchise was given a 1-month extension on an eviction notice they were handed for failing to keep up with the payments. But if you thought that was the end of the T-Bones in Wyandotte County, think again. The unified government now inking a deal with a new ownership group to take over the stadium. And does that mean bringing back the T-Bones as well, Michael?
Yes, there is joy in Mudville, as we say in the baseball world. The T-Bones will be back. They've got new ownership and more commitments to refurbish the stadium, which is not in bad shape to begin with. And it does look like the unified government is going to pursue the $700,000+ against John and Adam Ellert, the old owners, for not paying their utility bills and other payments. But this brand of minor league baseball, which is a very modestly priced, very family-oriented element, will still be played next year in KCK.
Why do the unified government believe that this new ownership group, though, will be more successful than the other ownership group when they're basically going to be offering pickleball and an outdoor stage and a sand volleyball?
Right. They think they're going to try to do other things at the stadium, presumably, that would bring in some revenue and help support the team. And maybe there are some efficiencies that the ownership can bring to the operation of the baseball franchise, Nick. But this is a very close margin business. I mean, you know, it's expensive to run, and if you don't get crowds, you'll go into the red. And while it's encouraging that they have found another owner and that there are plans that, by the way, may be controversial to upgrade the stadium, it'll be interesting to see if they can make a going concern. Because
the unified government is going to pump $1 million into improving the stadium.
Right. And the other dynamic that has sort of changed for a while, the T-Bones and KCK, because the unified government owns that stadium, were promoting concerts and music events and stuff like that. They haven't been able to do that as much because right down the street now is the Children's Mercy Soccer Stadium, and a lot of those music venues are choosing there. So I don't know, even though they're going to add an outdoor music stage, whether or not that will work. They're going to have to hustle really hard to do this. And one of the things they need to do, Nick, I believe, is aggressively market the product of this small town unaffiliated minor league baseball, and they have not done that in the last few years under the old ownership.
And several Kansas City, Kansas residents speaking at the city hall this week saying they weren't happy that the new owners were going to get $1 million to help improve the stadium. They should be able to do all of this without any subsidies whatsoever.
That's right. I mean, the $1 million contribution in tax dollars is controversial, as Dave noted, and the question is, are they throwing good money after bad? And it's not as if the previous ownership was close to making this work. The numbers didn't work at all. They owe a huge sum of money, and so the question is, will sand volleyball and bocce ball be enough to completely change the fate?
Yes, we have to ask Eric Wesson that, who never went out there before anyway, and now is that going to entice you? The pickleball and the sand volleyball.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Eric's a well-known pickleball player.
Yeah, I guess.
World class.
But I don't. And I agree with the people. And we've had some phone calls from people who live over there. Why not take the $1 million and do something more beneficial, a grocery store, things like that, than watching somebody play pickleball?
You know, just to put a bow on it, Royals attendance is down. You know, attendance,
not winning.
in-person attendance at sporting events is down across the country, people preferring to watch games on their high-definition televisions and other things. So you've really got to do everything right to make a franchise show a profit.
Can you tell me what the current rules and laws are for possession of marijuana? Kansas City's new mayor is confused, and he now wants to make it simple. Simply erase the word marijuana from all city codes and ordinances. We will just get out of the business of restricting pot within city limits, he says, freeing up the courts to handle what he believes are far more pressing matters.
Our municipal court, our municipal prosecutors, the public defense we help pay for, we want them focusing on other issues and priorities in Kansas City.
Though he is the most visible figure in city government, Mayor Lucas has only one vote on a 13-member city council. How do those other members feel about this quick fix?
Well, Brandon Ellington has a ordinance that is going to be going before the city council to change the marijuana to 100 grams. I think one of the things that you have is the 35 grams is like $50 fine. $25 fine. So he wants to eliminate that. The problem that people are having with it behind the scenes is, does it open the door for them to be charged with a felony and going into state court, whether it be in a city matter? The Jackson County prosecutor said that she wasn't going to prosecute those cases, but that's her. What happens when a new prosecutor comes in, then the whole dynamics change.
Or whether it happens in Clay County.
Right,
or
Platte County.
And the police haven't been too happy about these changes either, and they've recorded, they say, up to 10 murders that have happened in Kansas City that have been a direct involvement in marijuana use.
Right, it's an interesting dynamic because it's becoming increasingly clear that the mayor and the police chief have very different views on marijuana, and so whereas Mayor Quentin Lucas wants to strip marijuana out of city codes, meanwhile, Police Chief Rick Smith has written a blog post about the dangers of marijuana and how it contributes to violent crime and has contributed to a number of homicides in Kansas City. And so they haven't really spoken publicly about how they view each other, but their words separately have made it clear that they're kind of on a collision course headed in different directions.
That claim by the police that tying 10 murders to marijuana in Kansas City was greeted with a great deal of skepticism when that was presented in front of the city council that's considering Ellington's ordinance there. Is there violence and drugs? Without question. Whether or not it's somebody buying pot on the street versus somebody that's buying 5 pounds of it can be two different things.
Yeah. And, go ahead, Aaron.
And in addition to that, is the conflict of marijuana, or is the conflict economics? Because people don't have enough money to do the things. Is the issue conflict resolution, whether they're getting into arguments about the marijuana and that leads to a homicide, versus is this based off of marijuana? There are so many other things you could tie to it.
Just to briefly, the laws surrounding marijuana are just about as confusing as you can imagine in our area. Medicinal marijuana in Missouri is just around the corner, so you will be able to legally buy some marijuana for some reasons, but if you're in a different county, it could be a state felony. It might be decriminalized in Kansas City. Somebody needs to sit at a table and say, we need to get on the same page about how we feel about this substance.
But I saw that there were about 350 different folks looking to have a medical dispensary license in the Missouri side of our metropolitan area. But I was wondering, if we're going to decriminalize it at the local level in Kansas City, are they undercutting any of these dispensaries if you're not going to face any sanctions just picking up marijuana from anywhere?
What will happen here, which has happened in other medical marijuana states and in some recreationally legal states as well, is there will remain a marijuana black market, because the price over the counter, literally, will be X, and the price on the street will be X, and the price on the street will always be lower than it will be at the counter.
And it'll probably be a better quality black market.
Not that Mike or I would know.
Black market, too.
Well, I don't know. It's my understanding this is going to be pretty high-grade stuff.
She is best known as the Republican lawmaker in Kansas who switched parties to become a Democrat. Now, State Senator Barbara Bollier from Mission Hills believes she is the best person to succeed Pat Roberts in the United States Senate.
The truth is, as a doctor, I've never really been about partisan labels, just problem solving. And we need more of that right now. So I'm running for U.S. Senate to be a voice of reason in Washington.
Bollier's entry into the race was considered so impactful that the leading Democratic candidate, Barry Grissom, quit the race and decided to endorse her. That was unexpected, but what are her prospects? It's been 80 years since a Democrat was elected to the United States Senate from Kansas. So why does State Senator Bollier believe she can overcome those odds, Colleen?
Well, there's still steep odds for her. Let's just be clear. She still faces a major challenge running as a Democrat statewide in Kansas. As you note, it's been nearly a century since a Democrat in Kansas has won a Senate seat. But working in Bollier's favor is the fact that she is pretty moderate. As you noted, she was a Republican, and so she kind of, she's pretty centrist, and that can play well in Kansas, much like Laura Kelly, who won the governor's race. And I think Democrats are hoping that perhaps Chris Kobach comes out of the Republican primary, and he just lost statewide. And so they're hoping for kind of a repeat performance that would give Democrats perhaps their best shot at winning this seat.
Unlike Laura Kelly, though, Barbara Bollier is not from Topeka or another part of Kansas. She's from Johnson County in Mission Hills, and it's been, I looked at the statistics, 40 years since any candidate became a U.S. senator in Kansas who came from Johnson County. So that's not a great launching pad for higher office.
The Bollier campaign will admit to reporters that they're going to, A, have to run a perfect campaign. Not a nearly perfect campaign, but a perfect campaign. And B, they're going to bank heavily, as Colleen just mentioned, that they are matched up against Chris Kobach as the Republican nominee. That is by no means a guarantee at this point. Maybe, and the money suggests it certainly isn't. Those are two big ifs, and that's very thin needle to thread.
I'm fascinated by the politics of the decision for Barry Grissom to get out of this race. I was told that by a pretty authoritative source, Nick, that the effort to get him out began several weeks ago, that they understood he was a flawed candidate. He had this problem as a former U.S. attorney. There was criticism of his service there, and that the Democratic Party at a high level, like a Washington level, began talking with Barry about, hey, maybe you need to move on. We prefer Barbara Bollier, who has the support of Laura Kelly and by inference from former Governor Kathleen Sebelius. But there was a theory 2 months ago among some Democrats that you just write off the race. We have no shot. We've never elected a Democrat. It's a waste of money. The idea that the national Democrats would try and clear the field for Barbara Bollier suggests they think the seat is winnable at some level. Otherwise, they wouldn't invest any time. They just say, everybody run and nobody will get any money and the Republican will win.
I don't know if they've been, excuse me.
So I think the Democrats at a national level are sort of hoping Kobach can prevail, as Colleen points out, and then they'll have somebody like Bollier who could step in and run a Laura Kelly-like campaign.
I don't know that the Democratic National Senate Campaign Committee has or will invest in to use your words. May get the obligatory visit early next year by the big shots, and then beyond. Like I say, it's going to be a really, really fine needle to thread.
It's rare to see a member of our local congressional delegation making a big splash on the world stage, but it's been quite some time since we've been represented by someone like Josh Hawley.
Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri just returned a few hours ago from a visit to Hong Kong.
I saw the protests themselves, Tucker. I said, I don't want to be cooped up in some hotel. I want to go out to the streets.
In just a 48-hour span this week, the Missouri senator flew to Hong Kong, appeared on national television, blasted the NBA and its biggest star, LeBron James, and in the same time frame was condemned on global TV by the Chinese-sanctioned leader of Hong Kong. Of all the issues, though, that we are facing in this country and all the issues we're facing globally, why has Senator Hawley decided to make the story of freedom for the people of Hong Kong his priority number one, Colleen?
You're asking the right question, Nick, because Josh Hawley, as senator, has not really been a champion for human rights, and he didn't speak up when Donald Trump said Kim Jong-un and I are writing love letters to each other. He hasn't come out in other instances to stand up for some of these issues and for human rights. And so, but it was an easy opportunity to take on LeBron James, to generate some headlines. He did physically go to Hong Kong, and Josh Hawley has certainly made a name for himself, taking on some popular and big names like LeBron James, and also he's in a war with Facebook, and so it's a good way for him to kind of elevate himself, distinguish himself from the pack on Capitol Hill.
His strategy has been to look at these big players, from prescription drug companies and Apple and Facebook and yes, the NBA and yes, China. Is that a successful strategy for him?
I guess it got him elected because you have to really stop and think about him being a United States Senator from Missouri. I think a better conversation for him probably is taking on NRA, given the amount of murders that are taking place in the state that he represents in St. Louis and Kansas City. I think that's a bigger argument for him, and that hits closer to home than going after LeBron James or anybody else about something happening overseas.
Regardless of the timing on this, he's on the right side of this question in terms of defending the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. It is more than the Trump administration is doing, and I'll give him props for the fact that he went out onto the streets of Hong Kong, where it's a pretty hairy situation, and there is live ammunition being used out there. Now, whether or not it's a grand publicity stunt, I'm not going to say, but I'm going to give him props for being on the right side of that question and going there and going on the street.
It is relatively low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's no real downside to going to Hong Kong politically, but I do think at some point Josh Hawley will have to show some results for his activity. I mean, he's taking on Facebook, he takes on Google, the opioid folks, goes to Hong Kong. All of those get a lot of headlines, but at the end of 6 years, Missourians are going to say, okay, what did you actually get done on any of this stuff? And so far, that record is very meager indeed. There is some danger in getting headlines and not bringing results, and I think Hawley runs that danger.
Because they got real ammunition on prospect.
Yes, they do, unfortunately. But in perspective, he's been in the Senate for less than a year. You're right. He's got approval on his record, but he's only been in the office for less than a year.
City Manager Troy Schulte recently announced he was retiring. At the time, he said he had no plans for his future other than relieving his wife of running the shuttles to his kids' practices and activities. This week, it's reported he may be doing a little more than that. He's talking with Frank White about joining Jackson County government. Now, the only evidence of that I see in the report is that Schulte spent an hour talking with Frank White. Couldn't they have been talking about the failing fortunes of the Royals or the trolls they both encounter on social media?
No, they didn't, but they could have. What they did talk about is they talked about the jail, they talked about infrastructure, and they also talked, along with the chairman of the legislature, Teresa Galvin, about Troy Schulte coming over in some capacity, perhaps as the county manager, which is a position that does not exist in county government at this point, and a whole bunch of folks in the courthouse saying, yeah, about time, this would be okay. But there are also some people that have some misgivings about that. I can't say here as we're talking that it's going to happen, but that conversation did take place.
Eric.
And I was thinking, because I reached out to him to get a response, and he didn't, but he has to live in Jackson County. There's a residency rule, and he doesn't live in Jackson County. So how would he be doing anything?
Where is he living? So he's in the Kansas City, Missouri portion of another.
Okay. Yeah, he lives north of the river. So I don't know if they could have been talking about the property tax.
There may be some homes available in Jackson County, particularly given the tax appraisal situation.
Exactly.
Also this week, the new life for someone who wanted to be mayor of Kansas City. Former City Councilwoman Alicia Kennedy, just appointed by Mayor Lucas to head the TIF Commission. I'm assuming technically this is not a job. They don't get paid to do that, do they?
No, it's a volunteer post. It was one of a number of announcements from the mayor of appointments to commissions, so it's worth taking a look at, because a lot of the people he named to these boards and commissions happen to be serving on the city council now. That's unusual. It's not unique, but it doesn't happen at this scale very often. So we're taking a little bit of a look at that. Alicia Kennedy, by the way, was a sharp critic of subsidies for private projects. Putting her in charge of the TIF Commission sends a message to developers that there's a new day down there.
Yes. Right, and that's what Mayor Quentin Lucas said. He said this TIF board is going to be different. They're not going to be a rubber stamp for development, and so, which is the knock on the previous council and the previous TIF board. And so it's going to be interesting to test the question of how things operate differently, whether they actually turn down some high-profile projects, particularly in downtown and in areas that are thriving and not in desperate need of subsidies.
And I think one of the underlying things is to get development east of Troost, and that was some of the comments and questions. But again, you still have the financing issues and problems east of Troost. Example, if you buy a property or do something there that's $1 million, in 4 years when you open the door, it might be worth $500,000. So you're already $500,000 upside down. And that is what keeps developers from coming east of Troost, and I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference.
The numbers may seem hard to believe. 1 in 4 students at KU and 1 in 4 students at MU say they've been sexually assaulted since starting at the two schools. And by the way, 15% of female students at KU in Lawrence say they've been raped. Those are the figures from a national campus climate survey just released. by the American Association, the Association rather of American Universities. The numbers are incredibly high, but is that what universities around the country are seeing, or is there something alarming happening at our area schools, Colleen?
Well, our schools aren't outliers per se. This wasn't a comprehensive survey of every university in the country, but of the universities they surveyed, there were a lot of other schools in this same basic range of nearly a fourth of women saying that they'd been sexually assaulted. And it's a stunning number, but unfortunately it's not a very surprising number, and it really highlights what a mammoth problem universities are facing. And even though the survey found that women on campus now know more about the resources available to them, they have more information, they're still being sexually assaulted, and they're often not taking advantage of those resources. They're not reporting these assaults, and they're not seeking out folks who can help them.
Are the numbers worse now than they were before, or, as Colleen points out, that because universities are doing a much better job of helping students understand where they can go and how to report sexual assaults?
I think
Apparently not.
Yeah, I think it's part of that, Nick, but I also think it reflects the pervasive influence of alcohol on campuses, and that's been a problem that's been growing for many, many years. Kids just drink a lot of alcohol now. That's kind of expected, and we see that across the board in stories about fraternity misbehavior and other problems on campus. I think the use of alcohol is inextricably linked to this problem, and they need to sort of address both of them going forward.
That's not going to happen. Not on campus.
Yeah, no,
it's sad, but it's not going to happen.
2 weeks ago, the Olathe School District was making the headlines as an elected school board voted to take on the nation's largest vaping company, Juul. Now, other area school districts joining the legal action, and not just one, Shawnee Mission, Blue Valley, DeSoto, all making plans to take on the electronic cigarette manufacturer, and they all claim it won't cost their districts any money because attorneys are taking on the cases for free, though those law firms will take a hefty cut of any settlement money if the legal actions prove successful. Why are all these districts on the Kansas side of the state line and not in Missouri, though? Does the impact of vaping stop at the state line, Eric?
Because Josh Hawley hasn't found out about it yet. I think you've had incidents of people having problem over in Kansas. Missouri hasn't documented the problems that people have over here to the same extent as Kansas.
Well, they had one death over in St. Louis, so it's not like it isn't a problem on the state line. It's sort of typically Missouri, to be honest.
Missouri is much more laissez-faire about tobacco. It has one of the lowest tobacco taxes in the nation. It has a tobacco industry, as we know. So Missourians tend to be more libertarian about these things maybe than Kansans do.
18 months after it was first announced, the last federal regulator signs off on Sprint's merger with T-Mobile. The FCC greenlighting this week the two companies coming together to form a new carrier under the T-Mobile name. Will the signs now come down across the metro and around the country? Will the Sprint name start disappearing at its corporate headquarters in Overland Park and at the Sprint Center downtown, Colleen?
Probably. So this was the last hurdle within the DOJ and the FCC and all of the regulatory approvals that they needed. But there's one remaining question mark, and that is that a number of attorneys general around the country are suing to try to stop this merger. And that's a very real problem for Sprint and T-Mobile. And there's a court date in December. So this is expected to go to trial. And unless they can convince these attorneys general that this merger is not going to be anti-competitive, this still could present a problem.
And some states have dropped out, including Mississippi, that dropped out of the legal action.
Yeah, there's a big concern here about the future of competition in the wireless industry as a result of this, and the fact that one of the FCC commissioners said the golden age of wireless may be over with this, and the fact that these suits from the attorneys general around the country are still there is a testament to that.
You know, another big Overland Park-based company also hitting the headlines, by the way, Feral Gas, which you may know from its Blue Rhino brand of portable propane for your gas grill, may be heading to bankruptcy. The company employs more than 4,000 people. They're warning investors now they may not be able to remain in operation due to huge debt. When you put a program like this together every single week, we can't hit every single story. What was the big story that we missed?
Was it the Chiefs showing they can still win games even without their star quarterback? Overland Park police ringing the alarm bell over distracted driving. They released this video of a white car being plowed into and pushed into the air on Metcalf Avenue, mourning the loss this week of a community leader and lawmaker, Yvonne Wilson. Did Kansas City schools get accredited? The Missouri Department of Education blasted for a baffling new school report card. Alarm over bike lane still packing council chambers, this time in North Kansas City. And would you pay $70 for mac and cheese? The first ever Mac and Cheese Fest launches Saturday at Berkeley Riverfront Park. It may seem pricey, but it's all you can eat and free drink to wash all the yellow stuff down.
What was your biggest story we missed? Was it one of those options or something completely different, Colleen?
Well, I know that Patrick Mahomes' dislocated knee is all-consuming, and it's hard to talk about anything else, but I think it is worth revisiting the Missouri test scores that were released this week, which were baffling indeed, and they have a very confusing new system of how they rate schools, and there's not just one bottom-line rating. You have to dig into a lot of different numbers, and you get a lot of confusing signals, and for parents and even teachers looking at schools, it's hard to figure out how your school ranks.
Michael Mahoney.
The tentative agreement between GM and the United Auto Workers, especially as it relates to the GM plant in Fairfax, there's 2,200 workers down there that are going to benefit from this. It looks like, though a union won some of the major issues on this strike was about, including more pay for temporary workers, a better ladder for temporary workers to join the workforce. It's a big story.
Eric.
The mayor's appointment to the commissions, and that was something, and of course Senator Wilson passing. She was a tremendous asset to the black community and Missourians as a whole.
I agree with all of that, but let me tell you, a week from now we will all know more about the anatomy of the human knee than almost anyone on the planet Earth, and because that's the only story that a lot of folks are going to be paying attention to today.
I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.